December 11th, 1978, Des Plaines, Illinois. 15-year-old Robert Peist finishes his shift at a local pharmacy. He steps outside to speak with a contractor about a potential summer job, telling his mother he'll be right back. His mother waits in her car, but Robert never returns. Hours pass, and the routine pickup transforms into an urgent missing persons investigation. This diagram shows the eventual scale of the discovery. Robert Peist was the final entry in a sequence of 33 murders committed over a 6-year span. Earlier investigations had reached dead ends, often categorized as runaway cases. Peist's disappearance provided the specific link that allowed authorities to finally trace the pattern back to a single person. That contractor was John Wayne Gacy Jr. From the street, his life appeared standard, as seen in this photograph of his brick, ranch-style home. He managed a construction firm, hosted neighborhood parties, and volunteered as a precinct captain. He also performed at children's hospitals and charity events as Pogo the Clown, seen here in full costume. This image projected a sense of harmless civic duty to the public. This record from the background check revealed a different history. A decade earlier, Gacy had been convicted of sexually assaulting a teenager in Iowa. He served 18 months before being granted early release for good behavior, a conviction his Illinois neighbors knew nothing about. Gacy's respectability functioned as a tactical defense. His status as a trusted local figure allowed him to operate without suspicion from law enforcement for years. Gacy lured victims to his property by offering high-paying construction work or by inviting them over to drink. He focused on teenage boys and young men who were often in transition between jobs or school. Inside the house, he used a pair of handcuffs under the guise of a magic trick. He would convince the victim to put them on to show how the mechanism worked, but once the cuffs were locked, the trick ended. This section of the case file details his methods. After restraining his victims, Gacy used a rope tourniquet to kill them, a process he referred to as his rope trick. By luring victims into his own home, Gacy maintained total environmental control. He had the privacy and the tools necessary to carry out his crimes without interruption. On December 21, 1978, investigators executed a search warrant on Gacy's home. During the search, they discovered a trap door leading to a dirt crawlspace beneath the house. This text lists the excuses Gacy used to explain the smell coming from that space. For years, he told neighbors and workers the odor was caused by sewage backups or dead animals, using lime to mask the scent of decomposition. This photograph shows the interior of that crawlspace. Police recovered 29 bodies from this area, many of which were buried in shallow, overlapping graves. Eventually, the physical capacity of the crawlspace reached its limit. This forced Gacy to dispose of bodies elsewhere, leading to the errors that ultimately brought the investigation to his door. Gacy confessed to 33 murders, admitting that when he ran out of room under his floorboards, he began dumping his victims into the Des Plaines River. This area chart visualizes the acceleration of his crimes. While the activity began in 1972, the frequency spiked dramatically between 1976 and 1978, just before his arrest. His defense team argued he was legally insane, claiming a second personality named Jack committed the murders. The jury rejected this plea. The way he managed his business, concealed the bodies, and used lime to hide the evidence proved he was fully aware of his actions and their consequences. In 1980, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Judge Louis Garipo, seen here arriving at the courthouse, presided as Gacy was found guilty on all 33 counts and sentenced to death. In 1994, Gacy was executed by lethal injection at the Stateville Correctional Center, shown here. His final words were an expression of defiance rather than remorse. This list identifies the victims whose names were eventually confirmed. Most were teenagers, and their disappearance dates span a 6-year period of silence. This final document notes a significant gap in the record. 5 of the victims recovered from the house have never been identified, despite decades of forensic testing. For 5 families, the passage of time has not provided closure. Their sons remain anonymous figures in a case file, leaving an unresolved void that persists half a century later. In the summer of 1982, the slow-moving waters of the Green River twisted through the industrial outskirts south of Seattle. It was a murky stretch, bordered by warehouses, truck stops, and cheap motels. On July 15th, Two boys riding their bikes near the water's edge found the body of 16-year-old Wendy Lee Caulfield. She had been strangled and left in the river. Wendy was one of many teenagers and young women working the SeaTac Strip, a notorious stretch of highway where runaways and women dealing with addiction sold sex to survive. King County detectives initially processed the scene as an isolated homicide. In an area known for heavy drug use and transient populations, a single murder did not immediately trigger a wider alarm. That assessment shifted on August 12th. After a motorist spotted something floating near a bridge, police divers searched the riverbed. They pulled up 3 more bodies: Deborah Lynn Bonner, Marcia Faye Chapman, and Cynthia Jean Hines. All 3 had been strangled and weighted down with rocks. Whoever was dumping these women in the river understood the ecosystem of the Strip. He knew that when highly marginalized people vanished, their absence would often be dismissed or overlooked by authorities, giving him a wide margin to operate in the shadows. By the fall of 1982, the discoveries accelerated. 3 more bodies were found in September, 2 in October, another in November. This chart tracks the month-by-month escalation. Through 1984, the body count steadily climbed past 40. When compared to other notorious cases, the scope became clear. They were tracking a killer whose volume surpassed any previous American serial murder investigation. The mounting pressure and public fear culminated in 1984 with the creation of the Green River Task Force. At its peak, the unit utilized more than 25 full-time detectives. They coordinated with the FBI, brought in federal profilers, and logged thousands of public tips. Despite marshaling the resources of the largest serial killer investigation in American history, the sheer volume of victims and the geographical spread of the dump sites overwhelmed the task force. One of the hundreds of names to cross the investigators' desks was Gary Leon Ridgway. He was polite, socially awkward, and entirely unremarkable. He was a reliable employee, spending over 3 decades painting commercial vehicles on the assembly line at the Kenworth Truck Company. He also maintained a strict routine of church attendance and frequently read the Bible, cultivating an outward image of a quiet, working-class citizen. But at night, Ridgway abandoned that routine to cruise the SeaTac Strip, picking up women and paying them for sex. During these encounters, he overpowered his victims, executing them through manual or ligature strangulation before dumping their bodies in wooded areas and posing them in degrading positions. He actively worked to confuse the authorities. He kept the victims' jewelry as trophies and periodically returned to the burial sites to move remains from one cluster to another. By separating his stable, religious daytime persona from his violent compulsions at night, Ridgway constructed a camouflage that allowed him to slip right through the center of the investigation. In 1984, witnesses placed Ridgway's truck near areas where bodies had been found, and a survivor reported he had tried to strangle her. Detectives brought him in for questioning. He was subjected to a polygraph exam. By controlling his breathing, staying perfectly calm, and mixing partial truths with his lies, Ridgway passed the test. Satisfied with the results, investigators officially ruled him out as a suspect, a decision that gave him a clear path to continue killing. 3 years later, in 1987, police re-engaged Ridgway. They executed a search warrant on his home and vehicle, gathering hair samples, saliva swabs, and physical trace evidence. Crucially, investigators also collected semen samples from the bodies of several victims. But in 1987, DNA profiling required massive samples and was prohibitively expensive, making it largely inadmissible in court. The physical evidence was secured in King County storage. Human deception had bypassed the era's analog interrogation tools, but the biological material was held until laboratory technology reached a matching level of resolution. By the year 2001, forensic technology changed. Advanced DNA profiling provided high-resolution analysis of biological samples, unreadable in the 80s. Forensic scientists pulled the 1987 swabs out of storage and ran them through the new systems. The results conclusively linked Gary Ridgway to 4 of the earliest victims found in the Green River. On November 30, 2001, police approached Ridgway at the Kenworth truck plant. After nearly 20 years of evading capture, he offered no resistance, reportedly telling the officers he had been expecting them. Recognizing they only had hard evidence for a fraction of the murders, prosecutors offered a calculated plea deal. Ridgway would be spared the death penalty, but only if he provided a complete, detailed confession for every life he took. Without displaying any emotion, Ridgway began sketching maps from memory. He directed detectives to rural locations across multiple counties, unearthing remains that investigators had never found. The gradual evolution of forensic science eventually reached the level of detail required to detect the evidence left behind decades earlier. This biological connection had been present since the search warrant was first served. It simply took 14 years for laboratory tools to reveal it. The court officially convicted Gary Ridgway of 49 murders, sentencing him to 48 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Yet during his interrogations, Ridgway calmly stated that he had likely killed more than 80 women over the span of his life, a number he admitted he had trouble keeping straight. This table documents the victims he was officially convicted of murdering. While dozens of names were finally restored, several sets of remains recovered from Ridgway's burial sites are listed only as Jane Doe's. While the DNA database eventually solved the case, the unidentifiable victims known only by monikers like Bones 10 stand as a permanent, tragic record of a society that failed to notice when its most vulnerable citizens disappeared. Between 1974 and 1991, the city of Wichita, Kansas, lived under a constant state of paralysis. A phantom killer moved through the streets, leaving families to wonder if they would be the next target for the violence terrorizing their community. The first documented attack occurred on the morning of January 15, 1974. A man forced entry into the home of Joseph and Julie Otero, where he murdered the couple and 2 of their 5 children. This table from the case file lists the victims spanning 17 years: Catherine Bright, Shirley Vian, Nancy Fox, Maureen Hedge, Vicki Wegerly, and Dolores Davis. 10 lives taken. Striking men, women, and children ranging from 9 to 62, investigators struggled to build a predictable profile. This absolute randomness created a vacuum of justice. For 2 decades, the absence of a pattern forced the entire city to confront the reality that anyone, in any neighborhood, could be targeted next. While police searched for a monster, Dennis Rader lived the life of an average suburban father. He resided in this 2-story brick house, appearing to neighbors as nothing more than a quiet, unremarkable family man. He was a pillar of his local community, serving as a Boy Scout leader and the president of the church council at Christ Lutheran Church. During the peak of the fear in the 1970s and 80s, Rader worked as an ADT home security installer. He spent his workdays entering the homes of terrified residents to install the very systems they hoped would protect them from him. Rader employed a strict mask of normalcy, using his obsession with rules and city codes to shield himself from suspicion. His neighbors saw him as a rigid, perhaps slightly odd man, but one who seemed fundamentally safe. This meticulously crafted facade of suburban normalcy allowed him to hide a profound psychopathic darkness in plain sight for decades. Rader approached his crimes with clinical precision, stalking victims for months and documenting his murder plans as meticulously organized projects. He sought to brand his violence, coining an acronym that described his specific methodology: bind, torture, kill. In October 1974, he hid a letter inside a library book establishing his BTK identity. Furious at the lack of headlines, he demanded national attention, asking how many more people he had to kill to make the newspapers. For Rader, the physical acts of violence were inextricably linked to an uncontrollable, narcissistic obsession with receiving public credit and inciting mass fear. Following the murder of Dolores Davis in 1991, the trail suddenly stopped. For the next 13 years, the BTK killer remained completely silent. Law enforcement was left with a cold case and no actionable leads. Working in an era before robust DNA databases, investigators possessed 0 physical evidence that could link a suspect to the crimes. During this hiatus, Rader worked as a local compliance officer. He weaponized his position to cite neighbors for overgrown lawns and minor code violations, channeling his need for control into municipal bureaucracy. Having committed 10 murders and successfully faded into the background of Kansas history, BTK had effectively won, a status he would have maintained if his ego had allowed him to stay silent. In 2004, a newspaper anniversary article about the Otero family triggered Rader's return. He was reportedly enraged that the story focused on the victims rather than himself. He proved he was still active by mailing bizarre packages, including bound dolls, intricate word puzzles, and even a cereal box, to various media outlets. Rader then asked the police via a newspaper ad if a floppy disk could be traced. The police replied with a calculated public lie, addressing him by a code name, Rex, it will be okay. Soon after the police published their reply, a purple Memorex floppy disk arrived at a local television station. This document shows the metadata investigators recovered from a deleted file on that disk. It revealed the name Dennis and a link to Christ Lutheran Church. After 3 decades of evading capture through physical discipline, his desperate need to outsmart the authorities digitally handed them his true identity. Investigators confirmed the match by obtaining a DNA sample from Rader's daughter's medical records. The familial match provided a 99.9% probability that Rader was the man behind the 1970s crime scenes. On February 25, 2005, Rader was pulled over near his home. When told he was being arrested, he appeared calm, simply stating that he had his suspicions as to why. He waived his right to a trial and pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. In court, he delivered a clinical, third-person account of his atrocities, showing no sign of remorse. While Rader proudly detailed the mechanics of his crimes, the families of his victims wept in the courtroom. He remained unmoved by their grief. Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, ensuring he will serve a minimum of 175 years without the possibility of parole. Dennis Rader's legacy is defined by a pathetic irony. A man who sacrificed his freedom and his family for infamy is now trapped in a solitary concrete box, brought down by his own blind narcissism. In early 1974, college campuses in the Pacific Northwest were defined by a sense of safety and routine. That routine was shattered over a single 6-month stretch. This timeline shows how 7 young women vanished from the Seattle area, one after another, without a trace. Police identified a pattern in the disappearances. The victims were all young, college-aged women, and almost all of them wore long, dark hair parted in the middle. This targeted efficiency created a vacuum of safety across the region. With no physical evidence and no reports of a struggle at the scenes, local investigators were left with few leads to follow. Theodore Robert Bundy presented the image of a successful, articulate student. He studied psychology and law at the University of Washington, projecting the persona of a promising young professional. He was an active participant in his community, volunteering for political campaigns and working at a suicide crisis hotline, assisting those in their darkest moments. This case file illustrates the contradiction of his life. His documented occupations as a law student and crisis worker appear directly alongside a confirmed victim count of at least 30 women. His clean-cut identity provided a layer of protection. While witnesses at Lake Sammamish had provided the name Ted and a description of his vehicle to police, Bundy continued to exist in plain sight as a trusted student and volunteer, moving between his public life and his crimes. Witnesses reported seeing a man with his arm in a sling at Lake Sammamish State Park. He used the injury to appear vulnerable, asking women to help him load items into his Volkswagen Beetle. Janice Ott and Denise Nasland were last seen with him on a Sunday in July. As this record details, their remains were discovered months later in a wooded area east of Seattle. In late 1974, Bundy moved to Salt Lake City for law school. This map tracks how the disappearances followed his relocation, spreading into Utah, Idaho, and Colorado. On August 16, 1975, a Utah Highway Patrol officer pulled over a Volkswagen Beetle that had attempted to flee after an attempted stop. Inside the car, the officer found an ice pick, a pantyhose mask, rope, and these handcuffs. The traffic violation immediately became a criminal investigation. After the stop, survivor Carol Duranch identified him in a police lineup, leading to his first conviction for aggravated kidnapping. Jurisdictional gaps between states had made it difficult for different departments to link their cases. It was a routine traffic stop that finally provided the physical evidence needed to stall his movement. While awaiting trial for murder in Colorado, Bundy escaped custody twice. He first jumped from a second-story law library window and later sawed a hole through his jail cell ceiling. Following his second escape, he traveled across the country to Florida, establishing a new hunting ground where his history was unknown to local law enforcement. On January 15, 1978, he entered the Chi Omega sorority house. This table shows the violence of the attack. In only 15 minutes, he struck 4 women, killing 2. He claimed a final victim, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, before a Pensacola police officer stopped him for driving a stolen vehicle. The murders in Florida were the result of a known predator escaping the justice system, demonstrating the human cost of the failure to contain him in Colorado. The 1979 Chi Omega trial was held at the Leon County Courthouse. Confident in his ability to manipulate the proceedings, Bundy chose to represent himself. The prosecution relied on eyewitness Nita Jane Neary, who testified that she saw him leaving the sorority house on the night of the murders. The trial centered on this forensic evidence. Investigators used odontology to match the unique alignment of Bundy's teeth to bite marks found on one of the victims. The jury found him guilty of multiple murders and attempted murders, and the court sentenced him to death. For years, he relied on personal charm and legal maneuvering to evade a final conviction. In a Florida courtroom, it was the physical record left on a victim's body that ended his ability to deceive a jury. Bundy spent nearly a decade on death row as his legal appeals were exhausted. In his final days, he attempted to delay his execution by offering to provide information on unsolved cases. This document lists the victims he finally admitted to killing. He confessed to 30 murders across 7 states, though investigators believe the true number exceeded 100. He detailed how he lured victims and dumped their bodies, showing no remorse. On the morning of January 24, 1989, he was executed in Florida's electric chair as crowds celebrated outside the prison. A white hearse eventually carried his body away from the facility, marking the end of the case. The investigation exposed the limitations of local police work when facing a mobile, cross-jurisdictional offender. His legacy emphasized the necessity of data tracking and forensic evidence, demonstrating that an offender's public persona is secondary to the physical trail they leave behind.